This occurred in 2022. I downloaded DoorDash with the intention of trying it out because I had been searching for more side income streams. Even though I was accepted and prepared to begin working, it took me 3 weeks before I made the decision to try making some deliveries. I simply continued to put it off. I was bored but not yet exhausted on the night after returning home from work, so I figured there was no better moment to give it a try. I was still getting used to things for the first few orders, but everything went smoothly. After that, I felt secure because it was a fairly easy procedure. I believe it was shortly after 12 a.m., and it was about 3 hours in. When a unique order appeared that stood out from the others. The enormous projected tip was between $30 and $40. That was around how much I earned in the previous 3 hours of labor. I immediately accepted the order without giving it much thought. It came from the only McDonald's in our entire town, which is open around the clock. I thought it was in the middle of nowhere, just on the brink of the highway that led out of town. I became aware that was precisely where the order was leading me after I picked it up. Before I could get 2 minutes further down the road, the DoorDash called. Client. He sounded older than me, perhaps in his 30s, and he seemed unhappy when he instructed me to double-check the location. A little perplexed. After saying it, I simply read the address the app was directing me to. A pause occurred. The man remained silent. I was about to inquire as to if it was correct, but he abruptly ended the call without saying anything. He gave me a great tip as if he were a kind guy, but I found it somewhat strange because he was obviously in a foul mood and didn't reply. Perhaps he wanted me to go above and above to fulfill his command, but even that seemed over the top. In any event, I simply continued to drive. The road leading straight out of town made it feel like I was driving a long way even though I was only 15 minutes away. Although there were a few minor, haphazard neighborhoods scattered around, it appeared to be primarily barren countryside or solitary residences along the roadside. I had a weird, uneasy feeling about this delivery as I continued to drive. I sensed that this order was different, whether it was because of the strange phone call, the deserted and foggy road, or the unknown area. I felt no better when I pulled off the road and onto the gravel driveway. I was driving across a tall grass field with little view of what lay beyond, but I could see very little through the thick fog. I took my time driving until I reached the house. It was one of those old farm-style homes with a big wraparound porch and wooden accents, sitting alone in the middle of the field. I could see that the big address digits matched the address I had on the order because the lights were on in the windows. After parking, I took the food outside. Starting toward their front door. It was difficult to ignore how it was silent outside. There were no sounds at all, save for the faint wind rustling the long grass. Not even the sound of a TV or conversation came from within the house. When I went to knock, the door creaked open as if it hadn't been completely closed. The voice of a man shouted from the rear of the house at once. The man from the phone was back. He inquired as to if I was the driver of the DoorDash. Yes, I replied, adding that I would simply drop his order on the porch here. However, he answered right away and asked if I may place it on the kitchen countertop inside. Once more, I thought he sounded somewhat agitated or, for whatever reason, in a terrible mood. I stepped inside a couple of times. The house smelled musty, like it was not very clean, like ancient wood. The man abruptly switched on music within a few seconds. It came from the rear, just where I had heard him speak. It was an extremely loud vintage piano song. I was a little alarmed. I yelled out, "Sir. Hi there." He had stopped answering. Even with the tip he gave, I began to think that perhaps this wasn't worth it. Simply put, nothing felt right. For example, why in the world did he abruptly stop answering and begin playing piano music as I entered his home? I saw that it was growing darker as I approached the end of the corridor, which led to the kitchen. Notably, the room I believed the man was in was completely dark, much like the other rooms next to the kitchen. I abruptly stopped moving, left the suitcase on the floor, and hurried back toward the entrance. I was on the verge of having a heart attack when I spotted the man standing a few steps away from the door in the dark. He stared at me with wide eyes, and I can still clearly remember the whites in his eyes nearly burning. I seemed to have caught him in the middle of something. It seemed like minutes passed during that brief moment. Furthermore, now that I think about it, I could swear he had something in his hands, but I never got a chance to look at it, so I can't say for sure. I ran outside, got into my car, and drove back to the road through the fog before anything could happen. Based on the man's posture, I'm positive he was attempting to enter the house covertly in order to lock me inside with him. Now that I think about it, that probably explains the music, muffling the sound of him creeping through the house as I walked down the hallway. That night, I deleted the app and never looked back. I definitely made some questionable decisions that I'm not proud of, but I don't think I deserved whatever that guy was going to do to me had I been just a few seconds late and been locked inside with him. Music, Story 2, by C. Music. I was 28, living alone in a small city after getting laid off from my longtime job. That job was the only reason I even moved to this city to begin with. So, this was pretty devastating. I really wasn't sure which direction I wanted to go with my life. But while I tried to think about things, I figured I'd get any job I could just to pass the time. After a few weeks of searching, I got an offer from a small motel on the edge of the city. I went in for a few short days of training, but this happened on essentially my first full night alone at the motel working the counter. This motel was a pull-off on the highway about 30 minutes outside the city. There wasn't anything else out here. The only other building was an abandoned restaurant next to the motel. Through the first few hours of the night, a couple customers came in. They got a room and I checked them in, and that was about it. A lot of the customers looked the same, tired and in need of rest, but one lady stood out to me. She looked really tired, too, but she kept looking over her shoulder and was really rushing to get a room. Wasn't sure what that was about, but I only interacted with her for maybe a minute. Then she went to her room. Then there was a long time where I was alone. I just sat behind the counter staring out the doors at the empty highway. Barely any cars even passed by, so I figured the night would be really slow. That was until a man walked in. I never saw his car pull into the motel, so I thought he must have been a customer that had checked in earlier before my shift had started. However, he made it clear right away that that wasn't the case. He asked how much the rooms were and if any were available. "Yeah, we have plenty of rooms. Did you want me to check you in for one tonight?" He looked like he thought about it for a second, but his eyes kept glancing beside me. Eventually, he responded, "No thanks," and walked out. After he left, I looked over my shoulder trying to figure out what he kept looking at. The only thing over there was the key wall. That's what I called it anyway. Basically, it was just a bunch of pockets holding the keys to the rooms. This was an old-fashioned place, not having the fancy key cards that all the hotels have nowadays. Anyway, when he walked out, I kept my eyes on the door, wondering if I'd see his car drive away, but I didn't. I thought it was extremely weird because there was almost no way he walked here. He would have had to walk along the side of the highway at night for a stretch of probably 10 miles from the nearest place, which was just a gas station. After a minute, I walked over to the door and looked out at the parking lot. It was very quiet. Only the few cars from the previous customers were in the lot, and the man was nowhere to be seen. With nothing else out there, I closed the door and went back behind the desk. The night was going by very slow, and because it was my first night alone, the owner told me to just focus on check-ins and check-outs and didn't give me anything else to do. A half hour went by when the sudden desk phone ringing startled me. I quickly picked it up, seeing it was one of the rooms calling. A woman's voice came through. She was clearly in distress as she explained that someone was standing outside her door and wouldn't leave. I quickly got up, and immediately when getting outside, I could see that whoever it was, they weren't there anymore. I hurried up to the woman's room, which was on the far end. When she answered, she looked really nervous. I asked if she knew the guy or if he said anything, and apparently the man didn't speak at all. She saw him outside her window and asked him to leave, but the man wouldn't. And that's when she called. When the woman described him, though, I immediately knew who she was talking about. It was the guy from earlier. She described him exactly as I remembered he looked like, kind of tall and really devil-looking eyes. Now, I asked her if she wanted me to call the police, but she was very adamant about me not calling authorities, saying she didn't want to deal with any of that and was leaving in the morning anyway. She just wanted me to tell them to leave if I saw them. So, that was it. I went back to the main room. For the next 2-ish hours, I thought a whole lot about the situation. Like, what was the guy doing here anyway? And why was he standing outside the room? I thought he might have been drunk. Though, when he came in earlier, I didn't get that feeling. Whatever the case, in the middle of the night, I suddenly heard some commotion. It sounded like a bunch of stuff getting knocked over and thuds against the walls that radiated through the whole motel. I quickly ran out the door. From there, I saw the woman's door at the end was wide open, and the noise was coming from inside her room. I ran over. Looking through the doorway, I could see the woman being cornered in the room with the man standing in front of her, blocking her from leaving. I yelled, but I was so full of adrenaline, I don't even know what I said. He instantly turned around and looked at me. His face was full of anger and his eyes were bloodshot. After seeing that, I was terrified. He came barreling toward me and I just backed out of the doorway, but he ran straight past me. I saw him run out into the highway and then disappear into the woods on the other side. I quickly made sure the woman was okay and thankfully I'd gotten there before he'd been able to do anything to her. I then went back to the office and called 911. Turned out after the man was standing outside her door, he went around the building and into the front room while I was checking on her and he stole the spare room key from the wall. But it also turned out the woman lied to me. She knew that guy. It was her ex-husband that she was actually running away from, which was why she needed to stay at the motel and probably why she was so on edge. She said he was pretty unhinged and had violent episodes. I guess earlier when I asked if she wanted me to call the police, she lied hoping he would just go away without making things complicated. I'm not really sure, to be honest. That night was definitely one to remember, though, and not in a good way. I can't help but think how things could have gone differently or what would have happened if he didn't just run away. Who knows what he was capable of? Surprisingly, I kept the job and stayed there for a few months. But it got really uncomfortable having to deal with really strange people pretty much every night. So eventually I got out when I could. Story 3, by Maxine. My name is Maxine and at the time I was 23 and just moved to a new town to be closer to my parents. I didn't want to live in the city though, which was where they lived. So, I chose a smaller town just an hour north. I really knew nothing about it before moving, but my parents said most of the places close to the city were decent, and this town had good prices for apartment rentals. Prior to moving, I was bouncing between jobs, never really finding the perfect fit for me. After getting settled into the apartment and new town, I quickly started looking for job openings. I didn't have much saved up, so I couldn't be too picky. One of the first listings I found was for a local grocery store, definitely not a chain store, as I'd never heard of the place. I think it was just owned and run by a single family. I did actually used to work at a grocery store for a couple of years in high school. So, I applied, hoping my previous experience would help me get the job. Within a few hours of submitting my application, I got a call from a man named John. I wasn't expecting such a quick response, but John just asked a few basic questions and basically said I was hired without the need to come in and do an interview. I will say on the phone call, he was a little strange. I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was about him or the way he talked, but I don't know, it just gave me a weird feeling. There was one catch to the job, though, and that was that they were only hiring for a night shift stocking position. I'd never done night shifts before, and I wasn't sure how I'd like it. But in this small town, I didn't have many options for jobs, so I figured I'd give it a go. My first day was 3 days after the phone call. I made sure to bring in all the stuff I needed paperwork-wise, then left my apartment at 9:30. The store closed to the public at 9 o'clock, so by the time I got there, the lot was completely empty, and basically all the lights were off. I headed up to the entrance. John was standing right against the front doors, watching me as I walked up and opening the doors for me to welcome me in. John was pretty tall, about 6 feet 2 inches if I had to guess, and not very skinny either. He had a buzz cut and a thick beard. To start the night, he walked me to the office room in the far back to handle all the paperwork. As we walked through the store, though, I noticed it was a little bit janky, like the aisles were a bit too dirty and looked very old, and it just wasn't the typical grocery store I was used to. I thought it could have been how the average small-town stores were though. So I tried to not put too much thought into it. When we got to the office and while John was looking over the paperwork, he made small talk, but some of the questions he asked were a bit unusual. He started by asking about my move into the town, but then began asking about whether I lived alone or if someone drove me here or was planning to pick me up later. I answered, but tried not to be too specific because I did find it weird. John kept a very wide smile throughout the whole conversation, which didn't match his appearance at all, and it felt unnatural in this really strange sense. Finally though, after leaving my bag and stuff in the office, we got to work. He showed me to an aisle where he had some carts of boxes for me to stock and left me to it. This was pretty straightforward work, so I got to it. The first hour or so went by without much to say. I did realize pretty quick, though, that it was only me and John here, no other workers. I wouldn't have thought it to be an issue. However, I started to notice John peeking around the corner a few times and just watching me. I guess I'd just look up randomly and catch him standing at the end of the aisle, somewhat staring at me. He'd be standing there as if he were there for a few minutes, too, not just walking by, but without saying anything. He'd walk away as soon as I saw him. I tried to tell myself he was just catching up on his new employee. But why wasn't he saying anything or just asking how I was doing? Something was really starting to creep me out about this new manager of mine. And honestly, I was debating if I even wanted to keep this job after tonight. Things just felt off about this whole place. But I told myself I could make that decision later. I just had to get through this shift. I was a little extra aware of my surroundings for the next little bit. I think it was around 2 a.m. when I saw John again standing at the end of the aisle and looking at me. But once I noticed him, he started walking toward me with that unnatural smile. "What do you say we take our 15-minute break now? It's been a long night of working." I agreed, but didn't realize he meant we take our breaks together. He led me to the far back of the building where there was this heavy metal door leading outside. He opened it and gestured for me to come out with him. This was behind the building where the store receives deliveries and there was a small parking lot that had a single car in it. I assumed it was John's car, but as soon as we stepped out, that car turned on and drove away. John pulled out a cigarette and leaned against the back of the building. I wasn't really sure what to do here. Like I wanted to go back to the break room if they had one and just eat the lunch that I brought in peace, but also it was my first day, so I felt like I had to make a good impression. I stood there next to him. It was really awkward. I was looking forward at the trees past the parking lot, not sure what to say or do, but I could feel John's eyes next to me staring at me as he didn't say anything either. It was the most uncomfortable situation I'd ever been in. Then, after a good minute of standing there in silence, a car came driving back around the building. It was the same one that was parked and had just left a minute ago, but they didn't pass by us. The car started slowing down, pulling right up in front of us. As it did, I glanced over at John, gauging if he noticed this was weird, too. But he had this cold stare, looking right at me, as if he didn't even care about the car pulling up to us. I started thinking this was some sort of setup that John might be in on. It was just a gut feeling based on the way John wasn't reacting. Before the car was even able to fully stop, I hurried back through the door. I rushed through the back of the warehouse toward the office where I left my bag with my wallet, keys, and other stuff I brought. When I got to the office, though, everything was gone. My bag, my keys, and even my jacket that I hung up. It was like I was never there. I heard multiple pairs of footsteps coming through the halls, so I had to just run for it. I ran down to the front and out of the building. The nearest place that was open was a gas station I remembered passing by a few minutes down the road. I ran all the way there, getting them to call the police. I will say once I was out of danger, there was a small part of me that thought I might have been overthinking and overreacting about a big misunderstanding. But my doubts quickly went away when police got to the grocery store and were allowed to question John and take a look around. They found my bag, jacket, and everything right in the office where I left it. John put it all back. Not only that, but he declined any cars ever pulled up to us. And when asked to review the cameras, the only one that wasn't recording was the one behind the building. Pretty convenient. Overall, I couldn't prove anything. So, the whole case died out. Of course, I got the hell out of that town, breaking my lease and crashing at my parents' place for a while until I was able to get a steady footing. I don't know what was going on that night or what would have happened. It seemed like John was trying to remove every trace of me ever working there or even being there at all, and maybe had something horrible planned. But at least I didn't have to find out the hard way.